We've been taught a lie that living a life of discipline is the opposite of living an exciting life. And this is a mistake that I made for the first half of my 20s. I assumed that the thing I needed to avoid if I wanted to live an exciting and a meaningful life was routine and discipline and structure and all of these things that sound incredibly boring. But in this video, I want to make the case that the only way you will live an exciting life, the only way you will live a meaningful life, a life that's worth living, is by fostering a sense of discipline into your life before anything else. And so look, I get it. When you're a young person, it makes all of the sense in the world that you want to break away from discipline because we grow up in this bubble of discipline. We have our parents telling us how we can and can't behave, how we can and can't dress, the ways that we can and cannot go about our lives in the world. And then we go into school and university and we have all of these societal structures that tell us how to live. They discipline us into living a certain way. And whether or not that discipline is any good is a topic for another video, but that kind of discipline is entirely different to the kind of discipline we're speaking about here, the kind of discipline that will fix your life. We're talking here about self-discipline. And we can find examples in scientific research and in the military that make a great case for why self-discipline is the key to everything worthwhile. So you've probably by now heard of the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. If you haven't, a group of researchers in the early 1970s brought together a bunch of kids and toddlers and they told them that if you can sit alone in this room with one marshmallow on a plate for a fixed period of time without eating that marshmallow, in a few minutes time we'll come into the room and we'll give you a second marshmallow, right? Seems like a really weird test, but when you break it down, essentially what that is a proxy to test whether or not these young people had self-discipline. Could they hear, understand and follow a very simple instruction and get double of what was in front of them just by waiting? And whilst the results in the immediate term don't play much of a role in our conversation here today, some of the kids ate the marshmallows, some didn't. What happened years later is far more interesting because the researchers then followed these children throughout their lives as they grew up, as they turned into adults, and some really interesting markers came about, including the fact that in their SAT scores, years and years later, those who were able to wait for a few minutes, to listen to the instruction to not eat the marshmallow when the temptation was in front of them, to hold out and to get more, those who didn't eat the marshmallow, believe it or not, did better in their SAT scores. Their SAT scores is a good proxy for how they did in education. And of course, how you do in education is a good proxy for what you go on to do in life, how much you earn, the opportunities and freedoms you have. And therefore, we can make the connection that the higher degree of self-discipline that those young children had, the more exciting a life they went on to live. And these examples are everywhere. I don't think anybody can accuse those in the British Army of not living an exciting life. The men and women in the army fly around the world. They get to see places and speak to people and hear stories that none of us do. They get to take part in action, in missions that young children dream of. They live an exciting life. And that exciting life comes with a lot of moving parts, right? A lot of jeopardy, a lot of danger, a lot of fear, a lot of risk, a lot of all of these things that seem to be in complete contradiction to living a boring and disciplined life. And yet the British Army publishes online their values. This is a series of values that every single person in the British Army has to subscribe to. They have to live by. It is the cost of entry to be able to be in the military and to have that exciting life. And one of the 5 values is self-discipline, because those in the British Army who take life and death decisions every day, who operate in really dynamic environments, who have to be ready to go in whatever conditions at zero notice and perform at the top of their game, understand this, which is you cannot have chaos without first having order. You cannot have an exciting life without first having the foundation there to allow you to have that exciting life. And when I look at my own life, it's almost night and day, the difference between when I thought that running away from discipline would give me an exciting life and where I got to by embracing discipline. Because the beginning of my 20s were a series of endless nights out, of getting drunk 3 nights a week, of spending as much money as I could, sometimes on credit cards, to go and have fun, of waking up late, of eating shit food, of avoiding work, of not looking after my body, of not looking after my mind, of trying to live for the moment, of trying to be like YOLO in every single decision I made, because I thought that living in direct contrast to discipline, in doing what I wanted to do, that was freedom, and that was excitement, and that was a life worth living. But a few years into that lifestyle, when I was chronically underweight, when I drank far too much, when I was sitting at the bottom of my overdraft with thousands of pounds on credit cards, when my life was a mess, I quickly realized something, which is that because I was living in the moment so much and neglecting my future so much, I was quickly heading towards a future that didn't exist. I was laying no foundations. Through having no discipline, I was building this life that was hardly worth living, right? I was living day to day in every sense. And by trying to run away from discipline in order to have an exciting life, I was building the most boring life imaginable. Because imagine where that life would have led me if I carried on spending more money than I earned, if I carried on doing the bare minimum when it came to working, if I carried on not looking after my body and not looking after my mind and not looking after my health. Where would that lead me in 10 years, in 20 years, right? As a guy in his 40s who was broke and overweight and unhealthy and probably had a bunch of health issues and got nowhere in his career and had no personal relationships and didn't know himself and didn't have real confidence, because all of those things were a consequence and a symptom of running from discipline to live an exciting life. And yet when you think about it, I can't think of anything more boring, anything less exciting than being that person who would have been trapped in my 40s or my 50s, having ran out of time to do anything about it and being stuck in that life that I would then have been forced to live. Running from discipline was not giving me an exciting life. And so what I want you to do is imagine two versions of yourself 10 years from now, right? There's the version who just lives for the moment and makes decisions that feel good today. When your paycheck lands, you spend it because you like your little treats and you like your nights out, and you maybe drink too much and you maybe eat too much and you spend all night watching Netflix and you do all of these things that feel really good in the moment. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't feel good to do nights out and to spend lots of money and to chill out and to do what you want, right? That stuff feels amazing in the moment. It's why it's so addictive. But think about where that version of you, who continues those habits for the next decade of your life without correcting course and without changing where you're going, where does that person end up? What does that person's life look like in 10 years? What does your life look like in 10 years? And then park that version for a second and imagine a second hypothetical version of you. This version lives a little bit more of a disciplined life. This version takes on board what we learned about the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment, takes on board the value of the British Army to live with self-discipline, and you do exactly that. You maybe wake up a little bit earlier. More often than not, you make conscious decisions about the foods and the drinks that you put into your body, and you move a little bit more and you spend a little bit less and you invest a little bit more in those relationships that you're perhaps neglecting, and you try a little bit harder at work and you try a little bit harder in life, despite what society tells you about how it's uncool to try, how it's uncool to be different, how it's uncool to be doing something. You do something anyway, right? Where does that person end up in 10 years? Because one of those two versions of you will become a reality. You can't avoid it. So long as you're here in 10 years, which I hope you are, one of those two versions will exist. Either the version who has lived for the moment, every moment up until the future, and then you arrive at the future and realize that there is no future waiting for you, or the person who lived with self-discipline, who invested in themselves and who created a life worth living. A life which, by the way, in 10 years' time, once you've unlocked it, you will have the whole rest of your life to enjoy. One of those two versions is going to come true. Between now and then, it's up to you to decide which one.